don't know to come into our country. Then they commit a crime like this. Ainsley, you were referring to this. Crab walking up the side on the bottom right of that screen is the blurred out is the lookout for that. He's been on the loose since that moment.
He's looking around. He looks in that glass door to see if anyone's there. He gets the go-ahead. All right, it's time. Here we go.
And the other guy that escaped the exact same way, he was stopped by the lookout because the tower spotted him.
Look
and they
at
got
this,
him.
Brian.
This is it. And this is a live, wow.
Live footage.
Live footage.
Wow, that is a different hairstyle than we thought.
Yeah.
And Nate Foy says the ground crew, the aviation's been pulled back. The ground crews have gone. They got him. And I believe, Pete, is National Guard involved there?
Look at all the police.
I don't believe.
Is that not National Guard?
That is not. A lot of federal and state law enforcement have that kind of camouflage uniform. So that I do not believe is not. That's not the National Guard. That's your more specialized police forces, probably brought in. I know we heard there was federal help coming in.
Right.
So you've got specialized manhunt teams there. And if you're dealing with a wooded area, which much of this is, then you would want to have woodland or some type of camouflage. Those are law enforcement officers, not National Guard.
So the quick thing, that is dramatically different from the Ring doorbell. I mean, didn't he have a shaved head?
Well, he had a hoodie on, so you couldn't see his hair.
Wow.
You couldn't see his
hair. So
hair.
it was pulled back. So
yeah. And he shaved. He looked completely different in the shaved pictures with the hoodie on than he did in the in his mugshot.
We must be getting helicopter footage there, I would imagine, at this point, following that capture. Shows you how many assets were on the ground.
Yeah.
Looking for him. Looks like he's wearing an Eagles sweatshirt, probably took or stole from somebody else. He changed his pants. I remember we heard those were discarded at some point in the process.
I mean, how terrifying for all the neighbors in that area. They were shutting down schools. They were telling people to secure your property, make sure you have a weapon with you. I mean, I'm sure if, for women out there, I wouldn't want to be in the house by myself.
Right. And think about this. The self-control of all those police officers. You know they're dealing with a murderer who had them up 24/7 for days, and you know how they feel about him, but they're treating him with respect.
You can see the vehicle says Special Response Team on it, so they've got highly trained units out there looking for him within the cordon perimeter. Obviously, we don't see a rifle on him at this time. I wonder if there was any exchange at that particular moment. There we go. You see at the bottom right-hand side some of the weapons that were used. You got long-range sniper rifles.
Do you think that was the rifle they took from him? Is that a .22?
I don't know. Do you think
it looks like it?
It doesn't look like the rifle that the law enforcement would be carrying. So, Chris, our stage manager who knows a lot about rifles, was pointing that one out. That likely.
See it? He's holding it up.
Yeah, see it right.
You can see the mahogany wood or whatever kind of wood that is with the scope.
It's got a scope on it.
Yeah.
Could be a .22. That's what.
Wait, and that's his back, his bare back, right? What are they cutting?
Well, I gotta imagine they're also verifying. You could verify with tattoos exactly who he is. They're also, you want to make sure there's nothing in that.
Right.
These are probably pretty standard protocols of what law enforcement is doing. You just usually don't get this kind of shot.
You know what? Off the top of my head, they don't know if he's wired with something.
Sure.
Right. So you got to cut him away.
Or if he has other weapons, right?
Right.
Well, you would imagine they would have done an initial hasty search, no doubt. I mean, to pat him down and determine if there was anything else on him. Now that you're booking and processing and transporting him, they'll go to the next level. You see that they're taking photos. Maybe there's a tattoo on his wrist as well, but certainly on his back. These are all things you use as evidence to identify.
I heard in one report that he also committed a crime in Brazil, a similar crime. Has that been verified?
I've heard that too. Again, confirming we're not getting the best on a lot of these people that are crossing illegally.
Right. We don't know much about them.
Maybe wanted in their own country, involved in gang activity in their own country. Potentially, we don't know. But this is a pretty dramatic footage here.
Yeah, it's incredible. Thank goodness they caught him.
Yeah, so this was a story that Nate Foy's been covering from the first minutes. I'm sure he's got the update on the ground. He's the one who said they've pulled the aviation units out. They pulled the ground troops out, not troops, but the ground units out, police. There was a push this morning, I heard, for the National Guard to get involved. After all, this might be too big for cops. Now, think about this. You're already understaffed. You're already underfinanced. Think about the resources needed, the way people were pulled out of their towns to find this guy.
I'm hearing from some friends here chiming in that these are definitely SWAT teams on the ground right there. SWAT teams wear that kind of tactical camo. They wear them for all operations. They're doing a what's right now what is called a safety search, is what I'm told. And by the way, in 2017, he killed someone in Brazil. That's what I understand as well. So that was the previous criminal activity. But yeah, you're going to search head to toe this guy before you transfer.
So you killed somebody in Brazil and you still passed the background check here?
Well, there was no background check, Brian, at the southern border these days.
It's an open border, Brian, in case you haven't noticed.
Anybody can come right on through, and
Right.
maybe we'll help you and get you to the city of your choice.
So this rocked that whole community. The reason we covered this extensively, he was on the run for 13 days. He escaped prison. And then the whole community, the school district, the O.N.J. Roberts School District, announced that they were shutting down schools.
The convict, we understand, was in his home.
Yeah, so that's Ryan Drummond. We have him on the phone right now. He's a Chester County resident, and he saw the convict in his house when he broke in nearly 2 weeks ago. So, Ryan, thank you for joining us. Ryan, what's your reaction to this as you're watching the footage?
We are so excited. My daughter actually was the one who saw it first, and we were just celebrating seeing it on the TV. So, very happy. We've had nightmares every night.
Sure.
We've been waking up, so it's much needed relief.
That's one thing we kind of missed in talking about all this is the huge sigh of relief for residents in this area. The amount of stress. I mean, it reminds you kind of other times when people are on the loose. How have you managed that? I mean, have you been staying awake at night? How do you manage the fear that has been gripping this community for weeks now?
Well, it's tough as a parent because when you leave the room and you have one of your kids say, "Wait, where are you going? Don't leave," or they come in with a bad dream, then you don't sleep. And then I found myself, maybe not every night, but looking over again, going, "Is there somebody in the house?" You just get a little paranoid. So it's great news that they caught him.
So Ryan, is this the guy you saw?
Well, I'm not looking at the TV. I haven't seen him yet in handcuffs yet because I'm standing outside my house for better reception. But yeah,
he's got long hair.
I hope it's him.
They cut his top off. I don't know if he had a shirt on when he was there, but he's got a huge tattoo on his back. But he looks about 160 pounds, about 5'8".
I thought he was 5 feet tall. I thought he was little.
I saw him with a hat and a white shirt on from above, walking away from me.
Okay, tell us what happened, Ryan, at your house.
Well, I heard a noise. I looked for something to defend myself. The only thing I could grab was a picture frame of my wife and kids, which didn't seem like the best plan. And I flicked the lights on and off, and then he flicked the lights back. And that was the moment where my wife was already on with 911, but I was like, "He's downstairs. Call 911 right now." So it was a scary moment.
What do you mean he's downstairs? Did you know it was this guy? Did you sense it was?
Well, we had known that there was a prison break, and we had seen the police presence in our neighborhood. So we had never had a break-in before in the past. And, he was later found, spotted at my next-door neighbor. So
how far away is where he was? We're showing live footage of Chester County. I don't know exactly. Do you know how far this is from your house? Like how far he would have traveled to where he was ultimately caught?
So I believe that's between 30 and 40 minutes away.
Okay. So he flicks the lights on and off back to you, which is like, that's like in your face. I'm here and I'm in your house.
I'm here. Right.
So then what happened? Did he steal anything from you?
So he, this was a sustenance run for him. He had grabbed a peach, an apple, and snap peas. I only know that because I went to the farmer's market, later that afternoon. So we knew that he had taken some food. And it appears that that's all he had taken. He might have taken the white hat. We're unsure about that. But then he walked out, and after he flicked the light switch back, I wasn't sure if he was going to be coming upstairs or not. And that was the main thing. I needed him to know, I know you're downstairs, and really giving him the out and for whatever it was, that's how it went down. And I'm happy that, my family's safe and that they have him.
Yeah.
What was it been like talking to your neighbors? I mean, is this like, people get hit by hurricanes, natural disasters, but no one ever prepares for something like this.
This to me felt like we were living in a movie. And for the 3 days or 4 days that he was in our neighborhood, because after it happened, there was still SWAT presence, and we believe that they had him pinned down, basically kind of in our common backyard. There's a common wooded area, so it wasn't like the one moment and then it was over. There was that continual presence where you see the SWAT team coming through the backyard. That was was my backyard. I mean, that was there in our face.
And what kind of information did you get? Like while your area was the center of the search, what were you being told?
Not too much at the time. I mean, honestly, we were getting the updates as everybody else was. If we did approach, an officer, they would share as much as they could. But, just a sense that he was there. And then there was these, moments where we would get a phone call from an automated line, and then it would say, get in your house, lock the doors, and the police would run. So there was like 2 or 3 of those kinds of moments where it was heightened activity.
Right.
But otherwise, it was just this kind of surreal way of living for a few days.
So Ryan, do you live near
strange.
the prison? Do you live near the prison?
1.9 miles away.
Okay, so
is that always a thought in your mind? I wonder if something happens there, or
it kind of almost like a disbelief. I didn't factor that in when I moved here. It was one of those things like, okay, that's there, but not. I never felt unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
now we might be thinking more about that, but. I think
when you buy a house, you don't really think about where's the prison, the closest prison.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, you said he went to your neighbor's house. What happened after he left your house? He went to your next door neighbor?
No, so that was actually like a day or 2 later.
No way.
One of the police
So he
officers.
stayed in your neighborhood?
Yeah, he was in our neighborhood for about 3 days because they had the perimeter, and then he went across Route 926, which was over in the Longwood area. So then he was there. And if you look at like a Google Earth, going from Longwood then over to Bailey's Farm, and you have to cross a few different roads to get there. It's not right next door, because the van that he stole to get up to where he was, he covered some distance to get there in some real tricky terrain. So this guy, a bad dude, but he is the GOAT of being elusive, and I'm just happy that the police got him.
Well, we are too. Ryan Drummond, we can hear the relief in your voice, especially when we first started talking here. We're glad a community is now finally safe and can sleep quietly. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
And your kids.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ryan, I know it's hard to talk on television, but thank you so much. You're informing our audience because we've all been following the story for so long now.
All right, let's bring in somebody that's actually covering it, Nate Foy, who's live in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Hey, Nate, when did you realize they got the guy?
In the past 40 minutes, Brian. My source with Pennsylvania State Police told me at the time it wasn't totally confirmed. So then between then and now, I've been working to confirm all this. And we now know for sure that within the past hour, Danelo Cavalcante has been caught on day 14 of this manhunt. I can tell you that he was caught near the home where he broke into a garage and stole that .22 caliber rifle on Monday night. And I'm told that he was arrested by Pennsylvania State Police teams as well as Border Patrol, again, near that home where he stole that rifle with the flashlight and scope attached to it. I'm told that you saw the video of him being put in the Bearcat. I'm told that he's going to a state prison in Avondale, and they are pulling out ground crews and aviation teams right now. The search perimeter is this way, so I would assume that pretty soon they'll be removing all of the blockages that they put up. We have essentially watched this entire process play out in the community. There's been a lot of frustration. You were just speaking with one person that lives relatively close to the prison. Remember, there was another prison escape from the same prison in the same exact way where you saw Cavalcante crab walk up in between 2 walls just 3 months prior. So there was a mixture of frustration, but also a lot of appreciation for the work that law enforcement has been doing throughout this entire manhunt. So yeah, everyone is seemingly very happy, although I don't believe that word has traveled here too quick. And I do want to mention that Border Patrol was involved in taking Cavalcante into custody. And of course, his mother spoke with the New York Times saying that he's trained for survival. She talked about his poor rural upbringing in Brazil and how that prepared him for the conditions that he experienced out there. Keep in mind, this guy, before spending 2 weeks in the woods, was 5 feet tall and 120 pounds, so it didn't take a whole lot to sustain him through that. His sister didn't cooperate with authorities. She was arrested by ICE agents and faces deportation. And of course, Cavalcante presumably will have the same fate. He came to the United States illegally after that murder that you guys were mentioning in Brazil in 2017. And then he came to the United States and was convicted of murdering his girlfriend in Pennsylvania in 2021 by stabbing her 38 times in front of her 2 young children. So as we have been saying, this is an incredibly dangerous man. And it's great that not only do they have him in custody, but it does not appear that any law enforcement officers have been injured or killed in the process.
Well, Nate, that was my follow-up question. Do we know anything about the nature of the capture? What do we know about any particulars about how he was found, where, what the interaction was between him and law enforcement?
So, Pete, we're still working to confirm all those details, but what we know right now is that this happened within the past 40 minutes or so, and that it was very close to that home within the search perimeter, which is within about 2 miles of here, where he broke into that home where a homeowner was inside the garage. The garage door was open. Cavalcante walked in. Troopers believed that he was just looking for a place to hide, but there was that .22 caliber rifle there. Cavalcante grabbed the rifle. The homeowner shot at Cavalcante multiple times with a pistol, but at the time, authorities said they don't have any reason to believe that Cavalcante is hurt, and from the images that we're seeing of him being loaded up into that Bearcat, it doesn't appear that he was hit. So all we know right now, Pete, is that it was near that home, and I'm told that it was a combination of state police and border patrol that were able to find him and bring him in.
Yeah, there were not any drops of blood around the house. That's why they don't think that the homeowner was, shot him or made contact with him. Nate, you've been covering this for a long time. Walk us through, because it's been confusing with which house he broke into. We talked to one homeowner, as you just heard, Ryan Drummond. He broke into his house 3 days later, his neighbor's house. Then you're talking about this other man with the rifle situation. I know there was a farmer. He stole the truck from the farmer, and that ran out of gas. Walk us through the timeline of all this.
Oh, man, there have been so many twists and turns, Ainsley. So keep in mind, Cavalcante breached 2 search perimeters. So both of the first 2 were near the prison, which I believe the person that you just spoke with, he said that he lived, I think, 1.9 miles away from the prison. The search perimeter moved south after, I believe it was 2 Mondays ago at this point, that the trail camera footage came out from Longwood Gardens, which was south of the original search perimeter. So then authorities moved the perimeter south to encircle Longwood Gardens. And then I think it was Friday when authorities really felt confident, and they tightened that perimeter to under 1 square mile. And that was the moment that there was a lot of optimism in the community, and that was the immediate area that dealt with the previous prison escape. Those are the people, like you just spoke with, who live near the prison, and they worry about things like this often, whereas once Cavalcante got away from that perimeter, and he did that, Ainsley, by stealing a van because somebody on a dairy farm left the keys in the van just outside the search perimeter, about 3/4 of a mile north. He got in that van. He drove it over 20 miles north to where we are right now. Back in that search perimeter is where he dumped that van. And the question since Saturday night into Sunday morning, when that van was discovered, is, or was now, did he get any help? Did he get in another car, or did he run away? And if he ran away, that meant that he was still in this area. And it turned out, we learned when he broke into the home or the garage here in this area to steal that rifle, that meant that he was here. So it was bad news that he was armed, but it was good news that authorities actually knew roughly where he was, because prior to that, there was no search perimeter. So this has just been a wild ride, and like I said, so grateful that it doesn't appear that anybody has been hurt in bringing him into custody.
Hey, Nate, how soon until they start examining that prison?
Well, they've already started examining that prison, Brian. The warden has said that they are considering pretty much building an enclosure over the exercise yard, because you saw in that video, Cavalcante crab walks up and then he pushed his way through some razor wire and then also jumped over a fence. And this happened before, 3 months ago, when the other prisoner escaped. The warden said that they made some changes. They added more razor wire atop the prison. Clearly, that wasn't enough. So now they're looking at putting a cover over the prison, and he said that they were having some teams come in and figure out what else they could do to ensure that more prisoners can't escape in the future. But, man, they clearly have a problem there. 2 prison escapes in 3 months is not good.
Yeah, no doubt. Nate, you mentioned State Police and Border Patrol is what you're reporting were involved in the actual capture. I know that it appears there are SWAT teams there, maybe from the local level, county level, state level. What was the extent of the overall police or law enforcement presence? I mean, are we talking hundreds of people, certainly millions of dollars? How many vehicles, people did you see there to the end?
Well, as of yesterday, Pete, we know that there were over 500 law enforcement officers, and from the beginning, it's been a mixture of state, local, and federal resources. In the past few days, we heard Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens with Pennsylvania State Police talk about an increased federal presence. ATF agents came in this past week. I saw them for the first time about 3 days ago, but you have U.S. Marshals as well as Border Patrol, and then, of course, Pennsylvania State Police, and then police from local departments all across Pennsylvania. We've seen come here as well. So you have the aviation units, dogs, horses, drones, everything that they have, they use to find Danelo Cavalcante. But what made it so difficult is the terrain here. There's a lot of cornfields, and of course, in the botanical gardens and Longwood Gardens, it's really thick vegetation, difficult terrain to push your way through. They had some dogs that one of them suffered heat stroke, so it's been really, really hot, which made things difficult for Cavalcante, but also for the canines. So whatever resources that were available, Pete, they used in bringing this convicted killer into custody.
Nate, maybe that's why he was wearing long sleeves, because he had to get through a lot of terrain, and I'm sure there are briars and all kinds of...
Say that again, Ainsley?
I'm sure he was dressed in long sleeves, even though it's so hot, because he had to get through that terrain and he wanted to protect his skin. Thank you so much, Nate. Let's bring in Robin Dreek. He's a retired FBI special agent. Robin, lots of pressure on law enforcement because it's been 13 days. They did a great job. They finally caught this guy. Tell us, when you look at these images, what we're seeing.
Well, you're seeing a confluence of all these resources finally came together in success. And the greatest success here is that no one was injured. And basically, this guy's got a life arc of learning how to suffer and persevere and use resources at his disposal. And law enforcement was doing the same thing, and they finally outpaced him. They learned faster than he learned how to evade.
Yeah, it certainly is a success at the end, but there's a lot of risks that could have been mitigated, first from it not happening, but also, you know, over the course of 13 days, we're quite fortunate that no one else was hurt here. Do you think it was executed, I mean, successful ultimately, and there's a big sigh of relief there, but did it take too long?
You know, they're going to do a lot of after action on this. Anytime, and you know this from being in the military, you know, anytime you have any event that happens, you do a lot of after action. You see what went right, you see what went wrong. I think communication that the law enforcement did with the community was probably a highlight. It kept people safer than they might have otherwise have been. But obviously, they're going to take a look at the terrain, the technology, and also the leadership inside that prison system that allowed this to happen in the first place, the transfer and the relieving of the last warden. So there's a lot of after action that's going to happen.
What did the FBI do?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, the resources they bring in, you know, this is not our normal bailiwick that we do these things in. This is usually marshals. They brought in Customs and Border Patrol, and they had a lot of local law enforcement. FBI in this kind of situation is going to be brought in, kind of like what I'm doing, is kind of profiling this guy's background to kind of see what kind of life arc he has, to see what kind of resources and resiliency he has to do these things. I think the mother and the sister played a role in understanding where his life began and how he's going to be executing what he did.
So, Robin, what happens now? He goes back to prison. Will he go to a different prison now? I don't know if you can answer that. But and then what's your response to the 2 prison breaks within a matter of weeks the same exact way?
Yeah, that prison is under a huge review right now. As I said, that's going to start at the top of the leadership, looking at what failed in the leadership and as it trickled down both in leadership, resources, and manpower. But I think this guy's rewritten the book on what they're going to do. They're definitely not going to send him back to the same place because I would want to put this guy in isolation. You don't want him anywhere near anything that's going to be allowing him to do something even similar, or even contacting or training anyone else how to do that. I mean, the way he scaled that wall on the way out, you can see that was not the first time he did that. That was something from American Ninja Warrior on that. So it took a lifetime of reps of prep to do something just like that.
Based on how these things go, real quick, are you surprised that there was no shots fired that we understand, or an actual confrontation with law enforcement?
I actually am, and I'm relieved by it too, which most likely, we'll find out when they do the press conference. They most likely overwhelmed them with force and presence, because if it was just one or two officers that snuck up on him, the likelihood of him, if he was still conscious, because that's also in there too, he was probably really super depleted, as we're seeing in the images. But I think it's an overwhelming force that took him alive like that without any shots fired.
Well, Robin, we're learning that BORTAC is the Border Patrol unit on the ground there. They're the same unit that took out that shooter, remember, in Uvalde. What do you know about them? We have about 20 seconds.
They are the best. This is what they do. This is what they're. I'm glad they brought them in, because they are normally used to finding people in tough terrain that are really good not being found.
Robin, thank you for your service and for being with us this morning.
Well, America's Newsroom will continue the coverage.
Press conference at 9:30.
Good stuff, guys. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Breaking news, it is over. It took 2 full weeks, but a convicted murderer is now back in custody. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Hemmer, along with Dana Perino. You are watching coverage that we rarely get the chance to see. An inmate who escaped from a Chester County prison in Pennsylvania has now been captured. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, these are so rare that we are able to watch this live, as we did over the past hour as he was taken to custody. Remember, he's a small guy. He's 5 foot tall. Authorities taking Danelo Cavalcante into custody, ends the manhunt now, and what a manhunt that was. All the resources, Dana, that went out there into looking for him. And this fella who was on the air 20 minutes ago, Ryan Drummond, probably has the story of the day. He's the homeowner who says the other night he heard something in his house. He turned the light on, and Cavalcante turned the light off. And apparently he was looking for provisions to stay alive and maybe some clothing or food. And then Drummond said he grabbed the only thing he could to defend himself, which was a picture of his family, and realized that may not be enough. And that might have been the ultimate tip for authorities to track him down.
He escaped from prison on August 31st, and this was a day after he had been sentenced to life in prison for the killing of his girlfriend back in 2021. So he wanted to get out of the jail. This is a jail that had a similar problem, but that person had been caught. Danelo Cavalcante was not. And that took 2 weeks. Schools had been closed. People were told to stay indoors, lock their cars, make sure that they were keeping themselves safe, all for this guy. And the amount of resources that it took to bring him in is quite astounding. We're going to hear a little bit more about that at 9:30 when there's a press conference, but he is now in custody.
Yeah. So he's wearing a Philadelphia Eagles long sleeve sweatshirt, and we watched him turn his back to authorities as they cut the sweatshirt off and revealed markings on his skin, tattoos, which were clear indicators of his identity. You mentioned a press conference coming up momentarily. We've been watching these press conferences for 2 weeks, but now they have something to say. We did it, we got them, and the schools that have been closed in that area can now reopen without fear. 9:30 Eastern, we'll bring that to you live. Nate Foy, our correspondent, has been in southeastern PA for a couple weeks now. Nate, what do you have? Where are you? What do you see? Hello.
Well, Bill, we are just outside what was the search perimeter actually just about a few minutes ago. We saw some vehicles, some ground crews and aviation teams pull out to the applause of people here. We're just outside of Wawa, where there's been a lot of frustration, but now people are very happy to see that Danelo Cavalcante has been captured. And most importantly, it doesn't appear that anyone was injured in the process of doing it. I can tell you my source with Pennsylvania State Police tells me that Cavalcante was captured very close to that garage where he broke in Monday night and stole that .22 caliber rifle with the scope and flashlight attached to it. And I can tell you that it was Border Patrol teams as well as Pennsylvania State Police that were able to initiate that capture, and that he is now, you saw the video of him being loaded up into that Bearcat as, you know, they took off that sweatshirt that you mentioned as he's shirtless being loaded up into that Bearcat. He's being brought to the Avondale facility, the Pennsylvania State facility in Avondale right now. So that is where Cavalcante is going. You mentioned that we're going to learn a lot more from Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens coming up at 9:30, and I'm sure some federal assets will be there as well. This has been just all hands on deck for the past 14 days. And just thinking back at all the different parts of this manhunt, Cavalcante breaks out 2 weeks ago. He breaches the first perimeter when the trail camera captured him at Longwood Gardens, just south of the original perimeter. So authorities then moved south to encircle Longwood Gardens. And then that was the moment that everybody really felt that they were going to capture him, but he was able to sneak past troopers and steal a van from a dairy farm about 3/4 of a mile away from that search perimeter, because the keys were left inside that van. And then he brought it here. So that was that's why we're here. This is the last part of this search. The van was dumped about 2 miles from where we are right now. And the questions were at the time, was he receiving help? Did he get in another car? Did he steal another car? Or was he still in the area? It turns out he was here ever since late Saturday night, early Sunday morning. And there's just a lot of relief from everybody here in the community. And I'm sure that everyone will be tuned in at 9:30 to see exactly what Pennsylvania State Police share in terms of how exactly he was brought into custody. But we know that his sister, his family is being impacted by this, Bill. His sister is not, or did not cooperate with authorities. She's facing deportation. She was arrested by ICE agents. Of course, Cavalcante is an illegal immigrant himself after being accused of murder in Brazil in 2017 and then coming here and murdering his girlfriend in Pennsylvania in 2021. And prosecutors say that he stabbed her 38 times in front of her 2 young children because she was threatening to tell police about that previous murder in Brazil. So this is just a very dangerous man. He is not going back to the county prison. That was something that was just talked about on our air, I believe, during the Fox and Friends hour. That's not happening. He is being taken to the state facility in Avondale. And they are looking into that prison in Chester County because there's been 2 prison escapes just in the past 3 months using the same exact tactic. So they have a lot to look in there. But what's most important, Bill, is that Cavalcante is captured.
Nate, he apparently had a .22 caliber rifle with him and apparently some ammunition. Don't know if that was ever used. What's remarkable to me is they took him alive, and the amount of people who surround him, Dane, are these employed by the state of Pennsylvania? Did they bring feds into this operation? Because this looks like an Army Ranger unit surrounding him.
Feds were definitely added, but I don't know. Nate, do you know the answer to that question of who's surrounding him there in this video we have of him when he was captured?
So I just briefly saw the video. I can tell you that my source with Pennsylvania State Police says that it was Border Patrol and tactical teams from Pennsylvania State Police that initiated the capture. And then in terms of actually him being loaded up into that Bearcat, the transport vehicle, I'm sure that more resources were brought in for that. But throughout this entire time, it's been all hands on deck. You've had local police as well as obviously state troopers, but then multiple federal agencies. ATF agents have been scouring the cornfields behind me. U.S. Marshals have been involved from the very beginning, as well as, again, Border Patrol. So over 500 law enforcement officers as of yesterday were within the search perimeter. So it has been just a full effort from both local, from local, state, and federal resources.
Yeah, Nate, stand by. Back to you momentarily. We got Ted Williams, Paul Morrow, Joe Cardinelli, and we've got that press conference in 22 minutes where there are going to be all kinds of questions momentarily. Let's begin with you, Paul. You're watching this, and what was your first observation when you saw him pop up on that helicopter shot?
Well, I think, like everybody else, I'm just very, very happy that he's been taken without any other loss of life. This guy really looked like he was all in. This thing was beginning to remind me, if any of you remember, of a guy named Cunanan who went on a cross-country spree with a weapon, and he essentially carjacked his way across the country. He made his way all the way down to Florida, and ultimately what he did was assassinate Gianni Versace, the designer. It's kind of a well-known story, but what struck me is the most recent still shots that we saw of him on the Ring cameras. He's smiling. He doesn't look very concerned. At one point, he even looks like he's mugging for the camera. There was the sense that he almost was enjoying this, and that told me he was all in, and maybe he felt like, you know what, I have nothing to lose, and I'm not going alive. And if he's not going to be taken alive, and now he has a .22 caliber rifle, that really bodes ill. Even if he doesn't have ammo, which I know was one of the big questions, just the threat of the gun means he can get a car, he can do a home invasion, he can coop up in there until he eats, gets rested, etc. It really raised the stakes. The other key I would mention, just to what his mindset might be, is consider this. He gets out, they don't know he's gone for about an hour, right? This, first of all, looks a little bit maybe more planned than I initially thought. I mean, when you see him crab walk up that wall, if you look around his waist, in the back, in the small of his back, it looks like he's got something secreted. It might just be a towel or something so he can get over the razor wire, because that was one of the other big questions I had. But he also may have had some supplies that he got a hold of somehow in the prison, and that kept him sort of going until he got to the Longwood Gardens. Now, Longwood Gardens provided water. It gave him cover, top cover from helicopters, etc. So he's obviously very clever, and he kind of, it looks like he kind of knew what he was doing. But think about this. He then reverses course and goes almost 40 miles north, which means he goes back the way he came. It took him past the prison. So I don't know how close to the prison he actually went, but if you trace his steps, he went back towards where he had been incarcerated. That speaks to a certain level of boldness, confidence, arrogance, whatever you want to call it. And, I have to be honest, I was really beginning to get concerned that this was going to end a lot less peaceably.
Oh.
Before we get to Ted and Joe, I wanted to ask you one other thing because it was a striking image to see. What is the protocol about cutting off the T-shirt?
Yeah, so I think that they were very concerned. First of all, he was already cuffed, right? So getting the T-shirt off was going to be, a real pain, for lack of a better term. And I think that just no matter how much they had searched him, they wanted to just make sure he didn't have something secreted. And you have to be, they impress this upon you in academies. I'm sure the same thing with these cops. You're not going to be sort of bashful about doing the search here. You're going to search everywhere you need to, okay? Now he's going to go be examined. He may go to the hospital even for a cavity search. I mean, I don't know, but I can just tell you that guys like this who are so desperate, they're on the run, etc., you have to really make sure that they don't have something, I've had instances where the perp has a razor blade secreted in their mouths, okay? You would think, how could you do that? They can do it. And they have this little trick they do with their tongue. They go like that, and boop, it comes out. And now they have access to a razor blade, all right? So you got to really be careful. They're clever. They, the stakes are very high for them. So I think they just wanted to do a very fulsome search. They were taking some photos as well. I think they probably want to get photos of his tattoos, etc. And, there's one other thing that just occurs to me. I don't know which personnel were there, but a lot of this personnel, they're no longer going to have access to him. All right? If you're a Fed, let's say, right, and you were assisting in this case, now he's going to likely go over to the local cops, and he's going to be processed, he's going to be reincarcerated and resentenced, etc. This may be the last access they had to him, and so a bunch of people were taking photos. They might want to document his tattoos and all of that stuff.
All right, we'll wait for more answers on that. Paul, stand by. You're going to ride shotgun with us. Ted Williams, good morning. Welcome to our coverage. Maybe a lot of questions in about 18 minutes, Ted. What is your first question?
Well, my first question that I want to know is, how did they allow this guy to get out of that prison? Now, we know how he crab walked up, but there had been a prisoner before this guy made that escape that had made a similar mistake or escape. And you would have thought that law enforcement would have been on their P's and Q's. But I got to tell you, this is great news. This is what I defined yesterday as a game changer. And yesterday, my game changer was the fact that he had now gotten a weapon. But for the folk in that neighborhood, the pressure is off. I can tell you guys, about 3 weeks ago, I was up at Lincoln University there in Chester County, Pennsylvania. And I knew that the topography, I knew how it was in those woods, and I knew what law enforcement was up against. But they did an excellent job. They have brought this guy to justice. This guy was a killer, killed his girlfriend in front of children, and also killed another man. And what I was deeply concerned about, that at any time, this guy could kill again, especially after he had gotten that gun out of that garage. So I'm happy the way that this ended, should I say, but there is definitely a need for an investigation to make sure this doesn't happen again. But let's salute state, local, and federal law enforcement who went in those woods and stayed in those woods until they were able to bring this man to justice. And I'm so happy that they were able to contain him in one of the two perimeters that they had set up.
Thank you, Ted. And Joe Cardinale is joining us now, too. And the coordination amongst the state, local, and the federal forces here in order to bring him to justice was quite incredible. I know you've had experience with that, Joe.
Yes, the fact that they just let out just enough to let the public know, to protect the public safety, to protect the cops and everything. But they had an idea. They went around the perimeter. The dogs, we spoke about the dogs before, those canine, they're only as effective as, the handlers can let them be in that environment, meaning it's a hot day. They have to look at the size of the dog's tongue to make sure that they're not, overheating, which happened a lot this summer with a lot of other things. But the nexus in jail with these prisoners is it's very much alive. He can go into that prison and get all the information he needs and gets all the help from within. When you talk about somebody that Paul was touching on the fact that they have nothing to lose, Dana. They have absolutely nothing to lose. If you go back to 1981, I know it's a long time ago, but it's a prime example of the mindset from then till now. We had Lieutenant Jan Brinkers, who was killed off duty by one of the Cuban flotilla perps up in the Bronx. And when they got him in custody, they said, "What are you going to do to us? You're going to put us in jail? You're going to feed us? You're going to put clothes on us? That's nothing compared to what Castro does to us. So go ahead." So they have no fear of our prison system. They have no fear of our criminal justice system, and they come here and they're dangerous. And how many more Cavalcantes are out there right now? How many more that snuck across the border that we don't know anything about? That's the situation we have to address. And as Ted said, which is correct, now that investigation has been going in. How do we tighten up the security here? Well, you have to break up the nexus within the jails, too, of how they coincide with one another over there, and they help each other out. He probably told somebody, "I got to get out of here." And they said, "Well, this is what this guy did." And they probably aided him. So they'll go into that part of the investigation as well.
Yeah, apparently, Joe, he was reaching out to people he knows. The quote is that he was desperate, reaching out to people with whom he hasn't spoken to in years. Another person he reached out to was Cavalcante's sister. She was not cooperating, and now she faces the strong possibility of deportation. Paul had mentioned one case a moment ago. I think the one case, Dana, that comes to mind about those who run off in the woods and hide for a long time is Eric Robert Rudolph in the woods of North Carolina. He did it for some time.
For a long time, right?
Yeah, and eventually he was apprehended in the back of, I think, a strip shopping mall.
He had a lot of help, though, right?
Yeah, well, he was going through a dumpster at night one time, and that's when they spotted him. I don't know how much help he had in the mountains, but Joe, do we know how much help this guy had? Because based on the amount of resources they have, and yeah, it's a wooded area, but still, it's only 35 miles west of Philadelphia. 14 days to some people might seem like a long time. What do you think about that observation, Joe?
14 days is a long time, and the fact that his sister wasn't cooperating, they might deport her, good. That's one less problem we have to worry about in the future. But the fact that this man was out there, he, like I said, he's desperate. He has nothing to lose. That's the most dangerous component of this case. Then he becomes armed. And we said all along he was going to change his appearance. He's going to try to get some kind of transportation, whether it be by hijacking a car or doing what he did, stealing a car. So he was setting himself up. He changed his appearance. He shaved. He got clothes. So he was comfortable in his little environment, and he was little by little going out there. I think the state police, with all the forces that were joining with them from the outside, knew the area where they had to go, and they started concentrating on that, and they started focusing on just securing the public safety first, and then moving in and letting him just expire to the point that they could make a move, or that he was going to come out and into custody the way they did. If you notice in the photo there, I believe they did recover the .22 rifle, because that you could see it with the flashlight mounted on it. That was part of the pictures that they were taking.
Paul Morrow is still with us, and I have to tell you, here's a statement from the Chester County Commissioner, who says that changes have already been made to prison security. Well, I should hope so.
Yeah.
Because the same escape happened before. That guy had been captured. This one didn't. The enormous cost of this in money, taxpayer dollars, plus the schools that had to close, people losing sleep. Like there's a lot of cost that goes into this, and I would imagine that these security measures at the prison have to change. This is really outrageous.
Yeah, it was. I mean, think about just the closing of the Arboretum alone, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big facility. People go there, for recreation. And yeah, I'm sure they're already doing a very heavy scrub. They already fired one corrections officer, so they knew, look, we got a real problem here. We got to take swift action. There will be, I'm sure, a lot further adjustments, because 2 is inexcusable. But we've seen, it feels to me like we've seen a number of these. Look at the Epstein case. Could anybody have been more of a high-profile prisoner? And yet, what was done there? I heard about a couple of transfers. I didn't hear about anybody being fired. I didn't hear about any radical new protocols to make sure this doesn't happen. Let me speak up for the corrections officers. That's a tough job, all right? You're in those prisons night and day. You're dealing with the prisoners. You know they hate you. You know that they have hostile intent. And just like the police departments are shorthanded, corrections is extremely shorthanded. I know New York City is shorthanded in their corrections department, hundreds, if not thousands, of uniformed officers. And so what you do have is people working extra hours. They're tired. They get sloppy. And, you have to pay them overtime, which is also expensive. We just have a uniformed recruitment problem in this nation. I'm not saying I know that that's what this came down to, because I don't.
But you're right. It's a great point. And we see this over and over again. And it's not just in Pennsylvania. It's across this country that there was the defund police movement, but it's also been a recruitment issue. And we have to recognize that these jobs are very difficult for people. But also then the jobs of trying to track somebody down in 100-degree heat, 90% humidity, over a huge area that is heavily wooded, and with a lot of the bugs, the water. I mean, just the amount of the cost of this is just enormous. Obviously, a good result. They got him. Nobody else was injured, and I don't think he'll ever see the light of day again.
Hopefully. I mean, you would think that one of the options that would be on the table here at some point would be deportation. But, I have no idea how this is going to go. Very often, what happens is that on the state level, if a person is going to be in jail for a long time and deportation is on the table, especially in a case like here where Brazil already has an arrest warrant for him and he's going to go to jail in Brazil, the thinking domestically is, well, why should we feed and clothe this guy for the rest of his life? Because we can send him someplace else. So that very well may happen here. It'll have to work its way through the system. But I've had a couple of cases where somebody went to jail here. You got a nice sentence. Everybody was doing God's work. It felt like a victory. And then the person got deported, and you had to say to yourself, well, I hope he gets incarcerated back home, because I don't know, at that point you go blind. So at some point I would suspect that, he'll be going back to Brazil to face the music there, but obviously he's got plenty of music here to face as well.
Let's bring Ted Williams back into our conversation. Ted, the escape went undetected for more than an hour until guards took a head count. The tower guard on duty was fired. We now have a statement from the Chester County Commissioner in Pennsylvania talking about changes that have been made. Dana referred to it. Here's the statement. Chester County prison officials have made some immediate changes to bolster security in the prison, have brought in security contractors and make permanent changes to the exercise yards, and are reviewing and, where needed, changing procedures for both security measures and communication to residents who live close to the prison. Ted, your reaction on that? Some of this is to be expected, clearly.
But, Bill, I'm glad that they are making those changes. Those changes are necessary and proper. But I can tell you both Joe and Paul will tell you that some of the smartest people in the world are locked up in prisons. And so they are always trying to find ways to get out. Now, you know, what this brings me to mind of is when Griff Jenkins and I were up in Dannemora, New York, where they had 2 escaped prisoners and they were out in those woods forever. But the one thing that we have found in all of these cases is that law enforcement are not going to stop until they bring some kind of a prisoner like this to justice. I can tell you this past weekend, I was on with Arthel Neville, and I said that the 2 things that were necessary here were the 2 P's, and that was patience and the ability to continue to put pressure in that area. And this is what law enforcement did. They had to have been patient because this guy kept bobbing up every now and then. And he also was able to make phone calls, was able to get in the homes, steal a weapon, and to be out there. But they continued to put the pressure on this guy. And as a result of putting pressure on him, they were able to bring this guy to justice. But I got to tell you guys, I did not think it was going to end this way. I thought that pretty much that this guy certainly could have been killed as a result of having now found that gun in that garage.
Well, the perimeter was significant. It was about 2 miles, well, 3 miles east to west and 2 miles north to south. And there had been at least 500 law enforcement engaged in trying to secure that area. Back to Joe Cardinale. What do you think we're going to hear in a couple minutes when the briefing gets underway?
I think you're going to hear how the efforts were coordinated, how everybody worked together, and that they had an idea and that they executed that idea by putting the personnel in that area. And I'll tell you, Bill, something else you have to wonder about is the jails. I know you brought up a great point about the personnel, about how they don't have enough personnel. When I had the Brooklyn South Gang Unit, we were in touch with the prisons, especially where prisoners were going into a certain prison. We wanted to know the nexus in that prison. You know, they would watch the look at the tattoos, document everything. We had a case with the Latin King where the only result for him was to be totally out of contact with anybody. So they put him out in the desert someplace in a little 4x4 square down under the ground, and he had limited access to, because while he was in prison, he was still, you know, making hits from prison. So when they go to, as Ted said, when they go into these systems, it's like a college for them. All right, they actually go in and they have all the help they need. They have their professors in college. They learn more, and they just, you know, expound on their criminal activity because that's the greatest place for them. And when they put a mindset like this guy did, I want to get out, they have all the help they need from within. You need more correction officers that work with law enforcement. You need the right personnel inside those prisons. In this day and age, as Paul said, it's so hard to keep a cap on what we need for personnel, especially in the NYPD. The prisons are the same thing. So it's a round robin effect that we have to address. But until then, until that time comes, if and when it ever does come back to normal, all right, they're going to have to secure these prisons, and they're going to have to move these prisoners away from that nexus of the people who help them within the prisons.
Oh, good luck. This man is 34, and he was a bad dude. He was in jail, waiting transfer for a life sentence for fatally stabbing his ex-girlfriend going back 2 years to 2021 in Dana. She was stabbed dozens of times.
His mother, Paul, was utilized in the search. They had her record a message that they broadcast through the helicopter as they went over the search area, begging him to do the right thing, to turn himself in, and sometimes maybe that could help. She was also quoted in the New York Times. I don't know if the New York Times. She said that she believed his training was his suffering and the way he grew up, that it was going to sleep hungry. It was waking up as I wondered what to feed them. And I think a lot of us were wondering, gosh, you know, if you put yourself in his shoes, could I have survived for 2 weeks there? And it is pretty unbelievable what happens to the human condition when you get desperate like that and your ability to try to figure out a way to stay alive.
Yeah. So apparently, look, we all know he's no stranger to danger, right? He's been through all of this stuff in Brazil. He's got the other homicide, et cetera. And we know he is desperate as well. I think the interesting piece here is what you bring up, Dana, which is deprivation. He is a guy who is not going to fall apart because he doesn't have his ATM card, right? He apparently in Brazil worked on farms, ranches. He was a ranch hand. He worked in pretty rough terrain, and he got used to surviving in the bush and living in the bush as a matter of his daily life. That's the reporting that we've been seeing coming out over the last couple of days. So at a point when he has to go on the run, first in Brazil and then here, he's used to this kind of thing. He's used to going into figuring out in the woods, how am I going to survive, keep myself going for the next couple of days. So marry that with something that Joe Cardinale touched on, which is prison tradecraft. You know, there are some of the perps literally call prison school. That's the term they use, okay? And, you know, you see that throughout history. That's the same in the old mafia cases. You used to see that. These guys would go into jail. In jail, they would learn how to do bigger and better capers. So probably something similar here. It's no accident that he used a very similar method to get out of jail as the prior guy did. He learned that. And this guy, as I mentioned earlier, probably did have. Usually with prisoners, they think in terms of, I got to get out of here. Once they get out, they realize, now what do I do? And if you don't have a lot of support, generally we get them in a day or two. This guy very clearly had a mindset, had a plan, had some skills, and he led them, you know, on a pretty good chase here. 2 weeks is a long time for this kind of thing. And, you know, when you consider that he did have an hour head start, but an hour head start means about, what, a mile and a half, maybe two if you're running. And yet he has eluded them this far and got 40 miles north of where we had seen those photos in the Arboretum.
At one point, Nate Foy was in front of a railroad track crossing, and there was real concern that Cavalcante had figured out a way to get on the train. And at that point, then the search is nationwide.
Disaster. So that's why I brought up Cunanan earlier. Your enemy in this case, and in a case like this, somebody is out in the wind, are two things. Obviously a weapon, right? But also wheels of any sort. Because if he gets a car, he gets a bicycle, he gets anything. I'm going to tell you my concern as well. It turns out to be wrong, but just to be for full disclosure, when I saw him with the shaved, how tightly he had shaved, and he's relatively diminutive, 5 foot more or less, I actually thought he was going to disguise himself as a woman.
Sure.
I figured he probably, you know, he got into a couple of houses. If he could have figured out a way to do that, and we know he had access to a car, you know, at that point, the whole country becomes the canvas. And that was really the nightmare scenario of a guy desperate, nothing to lose. Yeah, they can have his mother broadcasting to him from the helicopter, but turn yourself in. For what? Life in prison? That's what he's facing anyway.
Well, she actually says in the article to the Times, she said it was better for him to die than to go back to prison. She says this: if it's to go to a place to suffer and die in that place, it's better to die soon. You don't have to suffer so much just to die later. And that might have been his mindset, too.
You know, that was, as I said at the top, that was my fear when, and you have one of those shots up there now on the screen of him smiling at the Ring camera. He just looks deranged. And that felt to me like a guy who had made the decision that I'm going out in a blaze of glory, you'll never take me alive kind of thing. And, you know, we may hear, I mean, you know, we saw the condition he was in when they got him. We may hear that that was his attempt. And, you know, kudos to the cops. They got him in one piece. He's alive. And now he has to face justice. And we have to figure out what went wrong.
Do you think he'd possibly go to the hospital for care?
Oh, he will, sure. Of course he will, yeah.
So it's 9:31 on the East Coast, 9:31 in southeastern Pennsylvania. We were told that a press conference would begin right around this time. And that'll be led by the Pennsylvania State Police Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens. You may recognize him when he pops up. And he's going to face a series of questions when this gets underway. Whether or not he starts or not before that vehicle stops is another question. Joining our conversation, for former FBI Nicole Parker. And Nicole, welcome to our coverage as we wait and anticipate this news conference. You've been watching your TV for the past hour. What happens next with this wanted man, age 34, now back in custody?
Well, based on my experience of taking individuals like this into custody, they are going to take him back to, I understand, the state system. And obviously he's not going to want to talk to them. Law enforcement always tries to get that interview. But this is a victorious moment for law enforcement. I think as the public, we watch it and we're like, why is it taking it so long. It's been 2 weeks. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of work going on. And as time progressed, we noticed that they brought on more and more law enforcement officers. You know, it went from local to state to federal. And we cannot thank enough, again, BORTAC from the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol tactical group that took down the individual in the Uvalde school shooting, I understand, was involved in this takedown with the Pennsylvania State Police. And that is a huge, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to them. In law enforcement, you want to take them down immediately, but the key is to remain patient. And you get tired and you feel the strain. There's no one that wanted to take this individual down more than they did. And I think, like many of your guests, and especially Ted had mentioned, I didn't think it was going to end with a safe apprehension. I truly believe that there was probably going to be some form of bloodshed because he is desperate. He did have the rifle. He had no restraint. And I commend law enforcement that he was taken in safely, alive, and he will now face his life sentence, which he was doing everything to escape. Yeah. He will have to sit in prison for the rest of his life.
So, Nicole,
now,
they are only as good sometimes as the public has information that can help them. And there are two bits of information in the last couple of days that are absolutely critical. One is this resident, Ryan Drummond, who spotted him inside of his house. Now, granted, he stole the rifle and off he ran. But at 8 p.m. on Monday night, police say he was spotted when a motorist saw a man crouched along a wood line in this same area of a township called East Nantmeal. So, Nicole, you've got eyes on the ground from people who live there, who in all likelihood help police and this search continue to winnow down the area to make sure that, well, they would get their guy, and today they have.
Right, and we owe our appreciation to the community. They were very vigilant, they were alert, and they provided tips to law enforcement. Law enforcement, we can't do our job without the human intelligence. It is so vital and important, and they were relentless. Everyone, it was all hands on deck. It was law enforcement, it was the community, and everyone had to pull together for this one. But again, these were a very difficult situation. You know, you've got a hilly terrain, you've got a heavily wooded area. This is not, you know, some urban city with, you know, video surveillance everywhere. And this was tough, but they had, you know, the aviation, they had the canines, over 500 law enforcement officers. You know, like Dana mentioned, this was very expensive. This was a very expensive operation. And the correction officer who allowed this to occur, again, there has to be a full investigation in that jail. This is the second time that this has happened since May. Completely inexcusable. And I think also people look at this individual and they think, you know, he's 5 feet tall, he's from Brazil, he doesn't seem real threatening. He was extremely sophisticated, extremely savvy. And a lot of that came from his upbringing, likely in Brazil. He's used to going without. You know, in a situation where a lot of people would crumble without food and water without food and without sanitation for 2 weeks, for him, he was able to get by. He was able to get by with the minimal amount necessary, and he did. And I can tell you, as you get in the mind of a criminal, they have nothing to lose. They don't care. They will die before they will go to jail for the rest of their life. I've been in instances where it has not ended this way, and the criminal has ended up dead because they have pulled weapons on law enforcement and have refused to cooperate. I am so grateful that he did not take any civilians hostage. That was one of my biggest concerns. Is he going to take a civilian hostage? Is he going to burglarize a home? Now he has this rifle. And like Paul said, we don't know how many rounds. The ammo, whether it's ammo or not, it is a perceived weapon. It is a weapon. And is he going to hurt others? And I am so grateful that there was a safe apprehension of this very, very dangerous individual.
Nicole, let me ask you a quick question, and then I would like to get this question actually from all of you in a quick round, if we could, as we wait for this press conference to get started. What question would you like to see them answer today?
To Cavalcante?
Yes. Well, no, to the press. There's going to be a press conference with state police.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to know, because I would like to know what was the final moment where they knew where he was. What was it that led them exactly to him? Was it a K-9? I would like to know what led them to exactly where he was arrested and what that final tip was.
Ted Williams, similar question to you. What question would you like to have answered there?
You know, I unfortunately, I don't know if I should say unfortunately, but I'm echoing what Nicole has said here. I want to know what in the last, let's say, hour before they were able to capture this guy, what was the activity that law enforcement was going through that led to this capture? And once they came upon him, what I want to know is, were they able to find a weapon close to him? And what was his, meaning the prisoner, the killer's reaction as he was being captured?
Joe Cardinelli, same question.
You know, I want to know where he's going from here. What type of incarceration will he be in now? Because personally, I think if he goes back to any kind of incarceration where he has contact with the GP, he's going to, you know, he's going to be a hero to them. I mean, he took law enforcement on a 2-week spree, and he's going to look like a hero to them. So you got to keep him away from that element. You need to isolate this guy.
That's very interesting.
He needs to be put in isolation to every degree.
I'm going to ask the control room if you could pull up the video of the escape from the prison, because I want Paul to point out to us that what you were talking about in terms of, here we have it, Paul, if you could maybe help people.
So look, if you see this, look at the small of his back. Do you see how there seems to be a bulge that doesn't comport with the way his shirt would normally hang?
I see.
Now, this is just an observation. I don't know this. I don't have a source. But if you're thinking along the lines that this guy apparently was, he's got to get over razor wire. He knew that much. Reportedly, that was the last hump he had to get over to get out of there. At the very least, I think he's probably got a towel or something wrapped around his waist, because it looks like he didn't get all cut up getting out of the prison from the images that we've seen. So my read is that he had something wrapped around his waist, a sheet, a towel, something that enabled him to put that over the razor wire and then just sort of catapult over it, you know, for lack of a better term. In terms of the question that I would like to ask, I think there's two, if I can get to. Dana, the first would be, did he have any help once he got out? I think your prior guests covered the, you know, the things that we're all really wondering. I would ask, did any of the folks that he got in contact with affirmatively help him? And the other, because then we might have a different investigation, a larger investigation. And then the other thing is, I would ask a slightly uncomfortable question, which would be, initially, you had a perimeter south of the prison. He was missing for an hour, and most of us expected, okay, they'll get this guy quickly, as normally happens. And then all of a sudden they had to call an audible, and they said, we have to include the Longwood Gardens, and we have to extend the perimeter. He has been pictured on Longwood Gardens. Longwood Gardens is only about an hour, hour and change walk at a good pace from the prison. So to me, the question becomes, why did you assume he was so close? Right. He had an hour head start. He's desperate. He's going to be moving quickly. It feels to me like they may have a comment where they clean that up a little bit. It might be just a misconception on my part. But I was really wondering why the perimeter was so narrow initially, because at that point, that's when he got really free to make some other decisions. Once you widen the perimeter, obviously his strategic options multiply, and that's a problem for law enforcement.
Nate Foy's back with us now. Nate, I don't know where you are in relation to where this press conference is going to take place, or where you are in relation to this slow-moving vehicle. Well, slow, it's probably 45, 50 miles an hour. Do you know where they're going first and what will happen next for him?
Well, Bill, I can tell you that he is going to the state facility in Avondale, which I don't have it off the top of my head, but I believe that it's within an hour drive of where I am right now. Where the press conference is happening in Kennett Square, and where you're going to hear Lieutenant Colonel Bivens speak, is closer to the first and second search perimeters near Longwood Gardens. Where I am is where Cavalcante dumped that stolen van that helped him breach that second search perimeter, and he came out here. And again, Border Patrol, State Police, and I'm also told CERT teams, the Special Emergency Response Team, helped bring him into custody again within the past couple hours this morning. And right now he's in that Bearcat being taken to the state prison facility. And everyone has a lot of questions, Bill. We're hoping to learn more exactly about how he was taken into custody, but we know that it was near that home where he stole a rifle from a garage, where a homeowner was inside that garage. Cavalcante, troopers believe, was looking for a place to hide, and he grabbed that rifle. The homeowner shot at Cavalcante with a pistol and missed. And now they've taken him into custody, and it appears that nobody has been injured, so that's the most important thing. But certainly more questions about how exactly they finally got over the hump on day 14 of this manhunt.
Nate, Ryan Drummond is that gentleman's name who lives there with his family. And I don't know if you've spoken to him or not, or I don't know if you still have a connection with us, Nate. If you don't, we'll come back to you. But just hang with me for a moment. We'll try and get the question out there. Ryan Drummond described on Fox and Friends an hour ago that he was at home the other night. He heard some rustling downstairs. He turned the light on, and then Cavalcante turned the light off.
Even more so, he wanted the person downstairs to know that he knew he was there, so he flicked the light switch 3 times. And then, in a very chilling thing to me, Cavalcante switched the light switch on 3 times as well to let him know, yes, I am down here. And Ryan said that he and his daughters have had nightmares over the last several nights.
I'm sure. Nate Foy, when we get that connection, we'll bring you back. The Pennsylvania State Police have a lot of questions to answer, Ted Williams. And the Colonel George Bivens has been out in front of this, taking questions now, unfortunately, for the better part of 2 weeks. And there will be some tough ones that come his way in a matter of minutes. We are told we're about 10 minutes away, maybe a little less, and there was some activity in that room. So, Ted, perhaps we're getting closer to that press conference.
And, Nate, you're back here. So, Bill, your question to Nate was about Ryan Drummond?
Yeah, I don't know how much contact you've had with him or not, or how many other correspondents have talked to him, but what more do you know about his story? Because this, you know, he talked about his family and his kids having nightmares. That's the kind of stuff you are haunted by, especially as a little kid.
Bill, I haven't spoke with him directly, but I can tell you that the entire community, there's been a mixture, quite honestly, of people who are very scared. You know, we've seen pictures, and I've spoken to people who say they're not worried because they have guns, and if Cavalcante tries breaking into their home, they're going to kill him. And then there's also people that are obviously very scared with the fact that a guy who has killed 2 people previously is on the loose, and he has, we know, broken into homes since that escape, and his ability to evade authorities sort of just gave people this idea of wonder of what this man is capable of, and whether or not it was, you know, luck at times, or skill, or just his ability to endure hardship, like his mother has talked about in his upbringing in rural Brazil. All this sort of came together to create a level of intrigue and fear about what he was capable of. And then once he got that rifle, it really changed things, because prior to that, there wasn't a defined search perimeter, which sort of, you know, expanded the discomfort zone, because we didn't know where he was. Then once he got that gun, we knew he was here, which was good. You know, it's uncomfortable to know that this killer has a gun, but it allowed authorities to really zero in on him and surround him. And of course, he breached 2 previous search perimeters, so there were some concerns from residents here about that. But it was good that authorities knew where he was, they could surround him, and then just methodically either wait for him to reveal himself or go and get him, which it appears that's what happened with state police, as well as Border Patrol and the CERT teams this morning. So, you know, different people, you hear different levels of fear. Children, obviously, this is something that's very